Hey, this is Steve in Dallas, Texas. It's Saturday morning, my friend, and you are listening to Light Talk.
Good morning. This is Ellen coming to you from the island of St. Bart's, and today we have a very special guest on Light Talk.
Hey there, this is Stan in Gainesville, Florida today, and you are listening to Light Talk.
And this is David coming to you from the beautiful Belmont Shore neighborhood of Long Beach, California. And if you don't already know, you are listening to Light Talk, and we are the Lumen Brothers.
And sister.
You better believe that, Ellen. Welcome, everyone, to episode 303. On last week's show, we started discussing the ramifications of the new artificial intelligence programs that have already been introduced to our industry, as well as their effect on stage design education. As we only really scratched the surface last week, we decided to ask our friend Bob Bonniol to join us today for this one-subject show. Bob is an amazing production designer who has already used artificial intelligence in his shows. Along with Bob, the Lumen brothers and sister will be discussing using artificial intelligence in live entertainment design and its current capabilities and future possibilities. We will also be talking about how to teach and use it in universities. In addition, we'll be discussing the misuse of this technology and possible ethical considerations. It is important to remember that this technology is moving so fast, what we say today could and probably will change tomorrow. So the Lumen brothers and sisters have committed that this is just a first in a series of episodes about artificial intelligence, and we will clarify any questions or issues that come up. So let's welcome Bob back to the show. Welcome back, Bob.
Well, lovely to see you all. I think there might be an argument that I've been using artificial intelligence since I was born.
You mean you're not real?
Well, I think that goes for a lot of us, Bob. Don't worry about it. But listen, where are you right now? What are you working on? I know you're like in the middle of text for something, right?
I am. I'm currently with Blake Shelton at Rocklitz, where we're getting his new tour together. This tour will be going out for the next probably 3 years or so.
Wow.
Wow.
Amazing place, that place.
We are here for the next 2 weeks putting the show together.
Cool.
Wow. That is really awesome. Because we see in the background, you've got all this really psychedelic light. I thought we were like at the Liquid Light Show podcast for a second. Anyway, before we get started, Ellen, could you please tell our listeners a little bit about Bob?
I'd love to. Bob Bonniol is an Emmy Award-winning director, production designer, and producer for theater, opera, concerts, and beyond. He is known for extensive media and interactive features in his productions and installations. Other titles include screens producer and VJ. He works with holographic technology, as in the 2018 project Becoming Ailey for Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater's 60th anniversary season at New York City Center, where he put the voice and vision of the late Alvin Ailey back on stage with his beloved company. In 2021, Bob founded MetaMode as a laboratory and consultancy for metaverse-based strategy and activation. The same year, he won multiple Telly Awards for his creation and production of the Panasonic CES virtual experience. In 2018, he won a Night of Illumination Award for his creative direction of the massive renovation of the core at General Motors World Headquarters in Detroit, which features an AI-driven interactive LED screen and creates a permanent, immersive, experiential venue for all of GM's brands. In the course of his career, Bob has worked from Broadway to Beijing, helping clients like Disney, NBC Universal, ABC, Live Nation, AEG, Marvel Studios, and Lucasfilm gather and dazzle audiences of millions. Welcome to Light Talk, Bob.
Wow.
Woo!
Wow. You must be tired.
Who's that guy? I want to meet him.
From Broadway to Beijing, is that sort of like Rochelle, a young woman's erotic journey from Milan to Minsk?
I don't think that the narrative is precisely the same.
Yeah, that's funny. Well, Bob, I think we should start the discussion with maybe a little definition of what artificial intelligence means to you and how you are using it in your designs.
Yeah, sure. So, that's a really great question, Ellen, and it's interesting. I think it might be useful to say that a lot of the tools that exist right now maybe folks should stop thinking of them as artificial intelligence, which implies that there's like a ghost in the machine thinking about things and sort of coming up with things on its own, or that Skynet's about to happen any minute, a Terminator is about to walk in here. And I think that conception comes from an idea people have about what's referred to as general artificial intelligence, which is an idea that at some point in the future, I think this will happen, but at some point they will build a piece of code that will become self-aware and that will have agency to kind of do the things and learn the things that it would like to do and learn. That kind of thing does not exist. And in fact, it's probably pretty far away from existing, if only because current thinking is it requires computing resources that would basically be equivalent to 100 times the combined amount of everything we have now. But, we're going to get there as quantum computing happens and supercomputers keep getting built. Not now. We don't have to worry about that now. You can all go to sleep easy tonight. But there are a proliferation of applications, and now this has been going on for at least a decade, which are referred to as expert systems, or sometimes they are referred to as machine learning apps, which are basically code that are very good at taking lots of information and then abstracting new outcomes or new discoveries from those informations. So they are pieces of code that are exposed to and trained with a lot of information so that they have what's kind of an expertise, if you will, in a certain thing. And then they're able to produce things that relate to that thing. So I've been using those kind of things for a while now. Ellen alluded to GM World, which we started building in 2016 and completed in 2018. And in that case, GM World has processing at its core. One of the things that the chief marketing officer of General Motors at the time, Tim Mahoney, asked me is he said, Bob, how is this thing different every day? Like, how is somebody walking into this lobby every day going to see something different? Or how about somebody coming in this Tuesday? How could next Tuesday be different? And we gave that some thought, and we kind of felt like software developed to the point that we might be able to build an expert system that could, know what day and time and date it was. Could know what was happening in the building and outside the building and around the building, and could know other things that it was told, and then it could make decisions about putting up new content every day. And actually what we did is we wrote two pieces of, what could be roughly termed machine learning applications. One of them used computer vision to systematically go through all of the content that GM has in its central repository and identify what's in that content and attach metadata. So this could look at a television ad, a training video, some marketing communication, and it could say, I see a Chevy Colorado. It's got this particular trim package. I've identified that there's a family in this piece of footage. With a woman and a couple of kids and a man with the truck. I see that they're on a beach. And then it would attach all of that metadata to the clip. And it did this to all of the vast amounts of content that GM produces really virtually every day. And it continues to do that. And then we wrote a second app that could then... it knows that it's February, so therefore it knows that it's cold in Detroit. It knows that February is maybe truck month. It knows that the Chinese contingent from the manufacturing plants outside of Shanghai are visiting today because GM has told it that. We gave GM certain sort of elements that they could add to that. And then knowing those things, the AI could then go in and say, I'm going to go pick that beach scene with the Chevy Colorado because it's truck month and because during the middle of winter, people would like to see a warm thing. And it would also maybe pick footage of other trucks that are assembled in Shanghai. And it would construct every day new programming for these 17 LED screens so that every day the experience is different. So that was the first time that I had used machine learning, or what are categorized as AI software, on a show. And since then, I've used more of that, both in the programming sense, like these kind of machines that are sequencing things, but more interesting lately, we've been using machine learning apps that have been taught how to create imagery, which has, I think, created, quite a stir lately.
Yeah, like in our show last week, we were starting to talk about these things, and we've seen a lot of it. I believe my brother sent me an image that a machine made. I think the prompt was create a set in a thrust theater for the rumble scene in West Side Story. And sure enough, there was a set that looked very much like one that could be created that was lit. That was already lit. I mean, it was rendered with lighting. That's right. Pretty damn impressive and a little scary, actually.
I don't think it's scary. I understand how it can be scary. Because it's certainly unexpected. I think that I started working with the applications that could generate images from word prompts, which is what you're talking about. I started doing that about a year ago, maybe a little bit more, actually, about 18 months ago. And back then, you couldn't get the AIs to produce that refined a thing like you're describing, David. But what has been shocking has been the rate of advancement of the technology. The things we're working at with now, you can be incredibly descriptive. What they produce is incredibly detailed and amazing. And as you say, I can absolutely imagine that description where you entered that thing and it would make a rendering of West Side. And of course it would light it, because everything it knows about West Side Story is probably theatrically attached, right? So it probably knows things. It's seen pictures and footage of previous productions. It understands the narrative of West Side Story. It understands it in theater, that there would be a set and lighting. And then it goes into that I'm trying not to be too complicated about it, but these apps don't store all of those images and footage and then go back and look at it and copy it. What they do is they learn, they're trained, is the terminology, on that vast database, and from that training they create a multi-dimensional matrix of information, which is called a latent space. It's referred to as latent space or latent space data. And then it plots curves in that data. So it doesn't go look for a picture of West Side Story and make a copy of that, but because it's been exposed to probably hundreds and hundreds or maybe even thousands of images of West Side Story, frames from movies, pictures of productions, etc., it understands what West Side's about, what West Side typically looks like, what aesthetics, what inspirations, what styles are used, and it plots curves through that data, which lead it to produce something that will be consistent with those things.
Wow, that's really articulate. I have a question. Since you are really good at explaining this, and it's relatively new to me, and I've been hearing about it where I work for about a year and a half, and I frankly didn't get it until I started to use it. And I started to use it, and I went, oh, now I see how this is relevant to me as a human being and as a designer technologist. I see it. I got it. But it's so. Can you maybe? I just understand that there are 4, let's say, flavors of AI, and you talked about the last one first, self-aware. And that's something that you're saying is a long way off. But there's 3 others, and I have these terms, and I guess they're universal terms. So maybe if you could take what you just said and sort of put them in these buckets: reactive machines, limited memory machines, and theory of mind machines. And then I'm going to tell you where I got that from. And maybe you could sort of teach us a little bit about what these, I think we understand what the 4th flavor is because you did that. And I think you just sort of explained what maybe the first one is in better detail than I've heard before. But can you just sort of maybe explain it to me like I'm 15 years old, maybe in that kind
Well,
of
that
way.
shouldn't be difficult.
You can explain it to me like I'm 60. It'll be all right.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, Stan. That's the first time I've heard those particular definitions expressed in that particular way.
Well, I'm going to tell you where I got it from.
Okay.
I asked ChatGPT to tell me.
Oh, of course you did.
What?
Well, you have to be careful because when ChatGPT doesn't know things, it cheerfully and quite committedly makes them up.
Right. Well, I think. Well, I've actually read these terms before, and I thought rather than me search for the article, I'll just be more efficient. And so, and I think what you were talking about with the curves, I think that's what I really want to understand, and our listeners do, that it's not a search engine. This is a whole nother thing.
No, yeah. So the kind of the reactive category you talked about is very much the kind of things that we built at GM. They in real time receive all kinds of different inputs, and then they catalyze those and come up with an output, and they are the kinds of artificial intelligence that is behind the computer vision in a car lately. That enable automatic driving to happen. They are the kind of AI that exists on assembly lines that will, can make the robots not kill people. That's reactive AI is typically deployed in kinetic situations where decision making has to happen that results in further kinetic activity. Now, that third thing you talk about, which I think is the category that a lot of these creative AIs, both ChatGPT and the image AIs like Midjourney or Stable Diffusion or Disco Diffusion, those are a different ball of wax. I tend to think of them as pattern matchers. They look for a pattern and then they try to match that pattern with an output. The funny thing about those creative apps, the image generation apps hilariously started because they were writing AI that could go around the internet, look at a picture, and generate a caption for accessibility purposes. And then one of these nerds one day said, wait a minute, what if we turn the code around and fed it the caption? Could it produce the picture? It's not quite as simple as that, but that was kind of the seed of how that happened. But it is important to know that they're not webs, they're not crawling the web. They're not search engines. They're not dynamically scraping the web. They are operating only off the training databases that they have been trained with, and over time those databases have changed, but they and scaled up. The training models for a lot of these image apps a year ago were far less detailed and refined and big than they are now. But, basically those training sessions show the app, millions of images, moving footage, all of it. And all of it is richly described, which is a key part of it, so that the app can look at it with computer vision, associate it with the metadata, the descriptions, the captions that have been given to it. And this is how it knows that that's West Side Story, because it looks at a picture of West Side Story. It doesn't know West Side from Sunday in the Park with George. It knows that it's West Side because somebody has put a caption on it or given it metadata that explains what's in it. So it associates those things, and then it creates this again, and I sound like I'm talking from a science fiction book here, but this multi-dimensional mathematical matrix of information that allows it to, apply aesthetics, apply composition, apply line weight, apply color theory, apply inspiration to make things like those things. But it is not a copy. It is not a sample. I understand Python. I know enough about the code to know exactly how and why that code is working. And if you talk to any of these developers, they'll just plainly tell you, oh, absolutely not. It's not doing that. And it is not. Now it's fascinating because I've heard people say things like, well, but I've seen signatures or I've seen watermarks on these images, and that's proof that it's copying. And what that actually is the AIs being dumb. Because what the AIs have been trained on, they've been trained on countless paintings, for instance, and they know that paintings graphically have a little detail at the bottom. And so they recreate that detail. Now, we know that detail to be a signature, but the AI just knows that if it's making something that the user would like to appear like a painting, the user probably wants that graphic element that it has seen in countless other paintings. So it'll make up a signature. Now, somebody who doesn't know better might say, but wait a minute, that's clearly evidence that was a signed piece of art. And it's like, no, the AI is being dumb and it thinks that every painting should have a signature. And it's also looked, of course, at many, stock footage images, and those things have watermarks. And so, if you ask it to create something that is a very common sort of stock image thing, like show me a beautiful, photograph of an incredible mountain landscape, it's probably going to figure, it's going to have looked at probably, hundreds and hundreds of pictures that it's been shown from Getty Images or something. And, so it assumes the big mountain landscapes have watermarks on them because that's a graphic element that it saw in what it was trained on. It's not sampling that picture. It's creating a new picture and giving you a dummy watermark, which is, kind of hilarious.
I'd like to follow up on that. It's something you just said. And this sort of gets to the crux of the entire AI movement, what's happening with Chat GPT in the education world. The question I have for you is, doesn't that make this an original drawing? If it's using the style or ideas from other drawings and assembling them and creating something original, which basically means that if someone, you're taking it into a different method of communication, if someone asks Chat GPT to write an essay on Hamlet and how it relates to the political situation of today in the United States, it will create this essay that's beautifully written and in perfect style. And it's an original, which means that there's no proof that can be made, that can be shown of that being plagiarized or someone else or something else writing that essay. So is this what we're looking at? Are these original compositions?
They are original compositions. And there are cases where the AIs will produce images that or in the case of ChatGPT, that it might produce text that seems alarmingly like something you've seen. That's a phenomenon that's called fitting in the AI world. And it's because, for instance, if you were to type Afghan girl into many of these AIs, they would produce imagery that looks very much like that famous photograph that was taken during the recent war of that Afghan girl.
The National Geographic photo.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And that's because the AI has only been trained in its training. Maybe it was trained on a dozen pictures of Afghan girls, and 6 of them were copies of that image, right? So it doesn't have much context to move off of that. And so occasionally they will, because of lack of information, produce something that looks a lot like an original image. Now, in those cases, from a legal standpoint, that would mean there's recourse. I mean, when we begin to edge this discussion of AI into things like copyright applies to output, right? So if I make a picture and it's a direct copy of something else and it doesn't exist within the boundaries of fair use, then the person who made that original image can absolutely take me to court for a copyright violation, because I have created, or maybe the AI has created, something that's that's too close. It looks too much like it. But it's funny, the metaphor I like to use when people say, well, but how does it do that? And I said, well, I went to art school. Yeah, I attended RISD for a while till I ran out of money and stumbled into a theater and decided I wanted to do something else. But when I went to art school, I spent a lot of money for people to show me a lot of art that was created by other people. They then systematically taught me how to reproduce those styles. And then I was expected to create my own art that synthesize those things. And that's effectively exactly how the AIs work. They've been shown a bunch of stuff. They've been taught how to create things in the style of, aesthetic of, or look of those things. And then each time they are prompted, they create a new, completely original piece of work. Now, if those things look too much like an already existing piece of work, it's the same as if I made it and painted it or photographed it. Now it has to be dealt with. Either I have to make something else, or, or risk that somebody who originated it can come and spank me.
So does this mean like you walk into Rocklidditz and there's some giant AI-driven interactive LED screen there, just say, and you sit down at your media server and you've got the AI programs in there and you go, okay, and it just spits it all out?
Well, that's an incredible science fiction future I look forward to, but that's not what the case is right now. I mean, it's not quite as deployed as that. It is going to be. And I think we'll get into that bit of the discussion in a few minutes, because I've already been talking to people who make lighting consoles, people who make media servers, people who are thinking about this as an integrated feature set. Right. It doesn't exist right now.
But you've got your computer, so you can hook up your computer and you say, just give me some dancing pink flamingos. I mean, whatever you want, and that's going to happen, right?
I do, but as with many things that I create with many other processes or means, that process, I can't tell you that it takes me necessarily less time than it would if I went into Photoshop and got into After Effects and made a thing. The thing about AI is there aren't deep controls. Like, I can describe a scene I want to make it, and it will often make it and make it really well. But if I'm sitting next to a director and he then says, yeah, I love that, but can those hats be red? I have to tell him, well, we can try. Because the AI is going to do whatever the AI wants to do. And there's not yet that kind of granular control for me to tell the AI, I love this picture, but make the hats red. It's not quite there yet. So that's one of the weaknesses of it. And, and the other, so you have to iterate. Like, I've made a lot of content for the show that I'm here designing now using various AIs. But in all of those cases, I sat for hours, like, how about this prompt? Nope. How about this prompt? Nope. Ooh, this is getting close. What if I tweak that? And, producing. And then finally I hit the piece of, spin the wheel enough times and I get the thing that serves the need. And I think that probably works in the context I'm in for designing for a big musical show or a big concert, let's be clear. But if I was designing for a musical and I was doing it with Julie Taymor, or I was doing it with David Laveau, or I was doing it with a major director who had very specific ideas, as a designer right now, I would be in a tough spot because I wouldn't necessarily be able to, address really specific notes they gave without getting into really arduous manual labor. And rotoscoping and going in and fixing things manually.
What's going to facilitate that next leap?
A few different things. A couple of things are about to happen, and they're going to lead to shocking advancements. We've been making jokes about ChatGPT, right? And GPT-3, which is the current version, has been trained on a data set that included about a couple of billion reference points. GPT is the engine behind it. And GPT is a piece of software that has come from an alliance or an amalgam of companies. Google is involved. The T in GPT comes from Google, and it's about tensor processing. So Google's contributed to this. Microsoft has contributed to this. There's a company called OpenAI that is the primary mover behind it. They've done a lot of the coding. But GPT-4 is supposed to be ready by February. Now, GPT-3 was trained on a couple of billion data points. GPT-4 has been trained on almost 1 trillion data points. So its level of refinement and capacity and capability I expect will be a great deal larger. Now, the same thing is happening with the image AIs. Basically, every 3 months or so, there's a giant leap forward in the capacity and size and depth of the training databases that they train them with. And every time they do it, these apps get more capable. They put out stuff with a greater degree of fidelity. A key thing that has happened, I think, in the last sort of 3 months is that the ability to create motion graphics and video has gone from stuff that kind of looked like crazy psychedelic dreams with all kinds of random eyeballs to, stuff that some of the stuff I have in this show looks remarkably coherent. And it's coming out of, in that case, I'm using an AI called Stable Diffusion, and a particular subset of that called Deforum, to create these animations. And the capability of that piece of the software puzzle has, even in the last 3 months, gone from I could, prompt it to make pictures of, cowboys riding on the range. And what would have come back in July would have maybe looked like cowboys, but could have looked like strange insects wearing cowboy hats. Now it will very much put out a video that looks like cowboys on the range, but it's very artifacted, and you have to buy into a certain style that it's doing. All of that, I'm usually loath to predict things, and it's difficult to predict with this because it's moving so fast. But if I were going to guess, I would say if we were convening next year, there will be entire apps dedicated to creating animation and moving footage with AI, and you will be able to be very specific about what you want, and it will create that.
I think Bob's blowing Stan's mind. You got to understand, Bob, that last week when Stan discovered ChatGPT, it was like the ape in 2001 touching the monolith.
So, considering that all of you are or have been educators, what does this mean in the university setting? And, clearly the literature people don't want people using chat, any 3.4 or any other number to write their essays, at least not right now. And on the design side, how do you feel about that?
It really has a lot of really great possibilities. But, we get to this point is, when is it creating for you? And how is the student learning? So I don't think we have the answer right now. And I don't think we should keep students from it personally, because I think that's where we're at. This is the technology. But I think it's really important that with students that we stress that it's a tool and not an artist. The student is still the artist. The designers are still the artist. And, drawing that line may be difficult, but it's something that we just have to work with and study. What do you guys think?
I agree with you. I think, it's like back in the day when lighting consoles would do effects for you, and you could always kind of spot it. If you did it a lot, you could go, oh, that's console doing that effect. But what Bob is talking about here is within a short period of time, you are in control. You can have that cowboy with the red hat on. So, I'm excited to see where it's going to go, and see how it's being used, particularly in the concert industry, because they're going to have the funding to probably do it first, and they're going to be the most bold with what they're doing.
It's interesting. I just listened to another podcast earlier this week. It's a great podcast, by the way, not to give anybody else shout outs, but the New York Times has a podcast called Hard Fork that is about technology stuff. It's a great podcast, but they had an educator from a university or a high school actually in Oregon come on to talk about this thing. And she's an English lit teacher, and she teaches creative writing as well. Her remark about ChatGPT, and I agree with it, is she's like, oh, there's nothing that comes out of ChatGPT that I would give anything better than a C to. And I agree with this. We use ChatGPT in the business to, last week, Colleen came to me and said, for compliance purposes, for some of our clients, we need to have a breakdown and a plan for environmental sustainability. And I don't know how I'm going to get that together fast enough to meet the terms of this next contract. And I said, well, let's sit down with ChatGPT. And holy moly, first we asked it for an outline, and then we took each section of the outline and we asked it to expound on that, and boom, basically in a couple hours we had, but we could never use that document. And right now, what Colleen now has at best is a great structure for her to go out and do the actual research and make sure to vet all of this stuff. Like, she's got a framework around which she can build that report on, and she will have to do that now, because we could never ever use that report as is. There were problems with it, but the teacher also went on to say that so much of learning is about figuring out which questions, like if I'm going to write a thesis, the first thing I need to do is to determine which questions I'm going to answer in that thesis and what are the things. And she uses it in the classroom. For instance, she will prompt the kids, okay, now use ChatGPT to give you a 5-point outline about why Hamlet corresponds with the current political environment. And they'll get that out of it. And then she'll say, okay, now close your laptops. And now for the next half hour, I want you to write on paper, based on that outline, your thesis. So she has embraced it, while some of her colleagues have said, oh my God, this is cheating. She said, well, what if, is it maybe we need to reframe that term? What is cheating? The software is helping, it is assisting, but it is maybe not necessarily cheating. She said, let's use this as a tool to assist learning. And creatively, for instance, I use Midjourney a lot to some of our architectural projects in the last 6 months that we're involved with. I've used the AIs to create lots and lots of concept development images to show the developers and the architects some of the things we're thinking about for digital engagements in those places. And what they're serving a purpose of creating a starting point for us to have a discussion and then to go from there. And then when somebody says, I love that image, I love this concept, let's go that way, then at that point I have to get into drafting tools. I have to get into the traditional tool set, because what comes out of an AI is not structurally sound. It may be whimsical and fantastic to look at, but it ignores all kinds of actually basic requirements that, a building needs to have. So, it's about finding its proper place in the creative workflow, and then using it. And I think that I feel duty bound. I do a lot of mentoring. I'm not on the faculty at a school anymore at the moment. I did teach at Cal Arts, but I do mentor a lot of kids, and I do a lot of master classes. And I think in the sense that I am using these tools professionally, I can't close my eyes and say that that they're going to be used. And it's my responsibility, if I'm teaching, to teach people to use the tools that will be deployed in the marketplace, not to create Luddites that, no, I'm going to draft by hand and I'm going to only use Kliegel 8x10s. It's like, why? Well,
right. Isn't that the old argument about drawing by hand, not using a slide rule, not using a calculator, not using a computer? Right.
Okay, my turn. I've got 3 things. I want to answer Ellen's question. And then I want to respond to one thing Bob just said, and then I want to do the thing that Bob said he didn't want to do. So the first one, as an educator, at my institution, quickly just tell you, Bob, that Chris Malachowski, who founded NVIDIA, is a UF alumni and decided to build a supercomputer for AI for us. So we have this, they claim, the most powerful supercomputer of any public university in the country to date. That could have changed yesterday. I don't know. But they've been telling us through the rhetoric for the last year, we want to see AI infused across the curriculum in every discipline. And I have not been able to understand how. And I went to seminars and I listened to artists who were using it, and I didn't sort of understand it until I started to use it. And so now I got it. But I say that, so I've already told my students, use it. We're going to figure out how to use it. It's a tool. you build things with tools or you demolish things with tools, but it's better to build them, right? So most of the time, demolition should be surgical. Building is complicated, as you said about the architecture. You said something really, really important that I think is key to the education piece. I often ask my students, how will I judge your intelligence? And they sort of scratch their head. And of course, the answer I'm fishing for is not by what they know, but by the types of questions they ask. And if these softwares sharpen the ability for the students and for us to ask the better question, that's a good thing. So I like that. And to your point about the granular control, this leads into my third question for you. You said you're loath to speculate, and I appreciate that because I think I am too. But just for fun, because we got about 10 minutes left of your time, are we agreeing, or is the general consensus, and from listening to Sam Altman, who's the founder of OpenAI, a wonderful podcast with him, emphasize that this thing is an infant and we are teaching them and they are learning from us. So is it prudent for us not to judge at this point the capabilities, because the boat is just pulling out of the dock and we really don't know how far this goes, and whatever other visions you might fantasize about in the way you described, I think in one of your posts about when you were a young guy wishing you could talk to a computer like a human being, or like Mr. Spock did in the original Star Trek. So give us a little bit of your romantic speculation, and we won't hold you to it, but I think that would be interesting to hear.
Well, I think, look, for a few things on this. First, I'm very careful not to anthropomorphize it. It's a baby and it's learning. I don't like that terminology because it's not a baby. It is learning, but it's not a sentient thing yet. This is not general AI. This is still machine learning. These are expert systems that are being trained. So I'm just careful to create that space because people get almost religious about this in online debates. They're like, that thing is thinking. And it's like, no, it's really not. Although it does things that will absolutely ring your confirmation bias bell. Now, speaking of confirmation bias, one thing that they do suffer from is garbage in, garbage out. Right? Like, depending on how you teach expert systems, they can absolutely be biased. There's a very famous episode of Microsoft releasing a machine learning empowered chatbot. This was a couple of years ago. And basically within 15 minutes of Microsoft putting it on the web, it had turned into an incredibly horrible, misogynist, racist entity, right? Because that ended up being the thing that it got exposed to a great deal. So what it gets exposed to is what happens. It's interesting. There does need to be thinking about how it gets developed. There needs to be constraints. We need to be thinking about those biases. That training has to be done with those things in mind, right? And the thing is this: government is not going to be able to regulate this. It is moving so fast. I mean, Congress has just woken up to the idea that there are printing presses, right? So, they're just never going to be able to wrap their arms around managing and regulating this technology. And so, it's moving so fast, so rapidly. It's kind of up to the people using it to determine how it should be used and what sensible constraints and boundaries we should use it within. But again, if I'm going to let my mind drift forward, let's talk about 5 years from now. I tend to think that we're moving, these things are such powerful tools for creativity that, I can't speculate whether jobs are going to go away or not, or whether they're going to change. I mean, I'm sitting right next to a whole bunch of follow spot control mechanisms that mean that nobody is actually on a follow spot pointing it. They're all in the green room with a joystick pointing a camera. But I think we're headed towards the empowerment of the auteur. is what I call it, right? And so I think it will be possible in 5 years for one creative person to sit in a room with a lot of technology around them, and for that person to describe to the technology, I want a bold and striking blue storm scene to be represented in video and lighting. And I think that the technology will be responsive enough to create those things. And then that person will maybe direct the human beings on stage. And then, maybe it will say, fantastic. And now I want, these scenic items to move in and out, and that AI will be fully capable of using computer vision to know if people are in the way and to make it safe. And also be able to know that, when that director says, I want them to move in poetically, the AI will mean, oh, that means he wants really smooth deceleration, and so this idea of the auteur, this idea that it is empowering individuals to be able to creatively express themselves in ways they maybe couldn't have before because they didn't have the capacity, the training, or the ability. Does that mean we should take away the ability for any human being to engage in the joyful process of creation? I think not. And I think that there will probably be in this future a category of art that is artisanal, entirely handmade by humans.
Right. Yes.
And you will have to pay bigger ticket prices to see that, maybe, right?
Yep.
And then and then there will be other categories of creativity and entertainment that are empowered by AI, and those will be, potentially produced by individuals or maybe smaller groups of people, and that will be a whole different form in a way.
I sort of like that. I like that notion that the handcrafted stuff will actually rise in value as the other stuff becomes easier to generate. So it won't go away, but it will just become more precious. The handmade.
What an amazing time we are living in right now.
It really is kind of Star Trek time.
I want to hang out for another 20 years to see what goes on. Listen, Bob, we know you're at the end of your dinner break. We want to give you a few minutes to get your head together so you can start working again. So, this has been so illuminating. Thank you so much, Bob. And we're going to have you on again. You're the best, man.
Happy to come back anytime.
All right, buddy.
Have fun.
Go back to work.
Have fun up
Get
there.
back to work.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, brothers and sisters. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Bob.
It's great to see you at least a sort of face to face. Yeah.
Indeed.
All right, buddy. Well, the rocking sounds of the Luminoids tells us that once again you've spent another morning listening to Light Talk. You can hear our show on just about every podcast site out there. Check out our website on lighttalk.org and be sure to follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our podcast. That way you will not miss a second of Light Talk insanity.
No guarantee is offered regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on this podcast. However,
if you do decide to litigate, the Snoot Group with the legal team of Sparks, Burnout, and Chase will defend us until our retirement funds are depleted.
Light Talk is written and produced by the Lumen Brothers and Sister, coming to you from Long Beach, Gainesville, St. Bart's, and Lidditz, Pennsylvania.
And be sure to join us next week when we talk about more lighting shenanigans and serve you much more of our casserole of nonsense.
Light Talk, broadcasting questionable lumen knowledge and humor around the world.
And we want to thank our friend Bob Bonniol for joining us, and we'll see you all next Saturday morning. Bye-bye from Light Talk.
Bye-bye.
Toodles.